I'm Marissa Lane, 32, the granddaughter of the man who built Lane Ranch with his bare hands. The morning of Grandpa's memorial auction was hotter than expected for late September. The ranch had already been stripped of most of its soul, the livestock gone, the tools boxed, the old tractor sold to a neighbor. All that remained were the people extended family buzzing like flies in folding chairs, sipping lemonade from plastic cups, and waiting to claim what they thought was theirs. I stood near the back of the barn, in the same dusty spot where Grandpa once taught me to saddle a colt. The air smelled of hay, engine oil, and faint resentment. Most folks were gathered under the shade of the oak tree, where Aunt Delia had set up her infamous folding table, the one with the laminated family chart and color-coded name tags. Red for direct descendants, blue for spouses, green for non-inheriting guests. She'd said with that syrupy smile that never reached her eyes. She gave me a green tag. I didn't say anything. Just peeled the backing off and stuck it to my shirt. People were watching my cousins, their kids, even some of the ranch hands Grandpa used to feed after long days. They all saw, and they all averted their eyes. I'd flown in from Montana 2 nights ago, sleeping on a cot in the bunkhouse because no one thought to reserve a room. I brought Grandpa's old ledger, the one I'd helped him update for nearly a decade. But no one asked. They acted like I was a visitor. Like I hadn't mucked stalls alongside him or watched the sunrise every summer before chores. The auctioneer adjusted his mic under the canopy. Static screeched through the speakers. I stepped forward, holding the appraisal folder I'd brought from the county office evaluation Grandpa requested himself, months before he died. I cleared my throat. Aunt Delia's voice sliced through the space. Honey, the family section is over there. This is for bidders only. I'm not bidding, I said quietly. I'm here to... She shook her head with a polite chuckle, as if I'd misunderstood some simple rule. Sweetie, it's just that this isn't really your place. You didn't live here the past few years. You don't even... I was managing the pasture contracts and equipment leases. From Montana. Grandpa asked me to honey. She cut in. Sharper now. This is about who showed up. Who was here? I heard someone cough behind me, probably Cousin Ryan, who used to steal cattle tags and smoke under the silo. He was front row now, arms crossed, smirking. Ma'am. A man in a white polo stepped up beside me. You can't be in the auction area if you're not registered. Can I escort you out? I turned, blinking at the man. He looked like he worked at a country club, not a ranch sale. This is my grandfather's ranch. Understood. But unless your name's on the registered bidder list? It is, came a voice from the left. Every head turned. A man in a pressed blue blazer stepped onto the platform, his boots too clean for real use. I recognized him immediately, Mr. Harwick from the county assessor's office. He was holding the very folder I'd submitted. This woman, he said, raising his voice, is the recorded property manager of Lane Ranch as of last fiscal quarter. Signed and notarized by Charles Lane himself. Her name is on all operational records since 2016, including the appraisal submission, which, if I may add, valued the land and water rights at nearly double the projected rate. The crowd went quiet. Even Aunt Delia's hands froze mid-gesture, her fingers still hovering above her lemon bar tray. Mr. Harwick turned to me, smile soft but professional. Ms. Lane, would you like to share the results? I looked around at my cousins who never visited, at the whispering guests, at the ranch hands with sun-lined faces who knew the truth, but had no voice in this. I opened the folder, my hand steady now, and for the first time that day, no one interrupted me. The hush was sharp, immediate, the kind that follows after something sacred is finally acknowledged. If you've ever been told you didn't belong in the place you helped build, if you've ever watched others try to erase you from your own story, leave a comment, or just let me know you hear me. Hit like or subscribe if your silence has ever hidden strength too deep for them to see. Because the moment they saw the number in that folder, they stopped talking. And they started listening. They started listening, but not because they cared. They listened because numbers scare people more than feelings do. The appraisal figure I read aloud, $4.7 million, hit them harder than any story I could have told. Their silence wasn't admiration, it was calculation. Suddenly, the girl with the green name tag had something they wanted to understand. Mr. Harwick nodded as I closed the folder. "I'll be available to answer any technical questions," he said, stepping back, leaving me alone in the center, surrounded by relatives I barely recognized. My throat was dry. The words tasted like grit. Aunt Delia recovered first. She stepped forward with a laugh, the kind that rings false but buys time. "Well now, that's certainly interesting. I had no idea Charlie was still signing papers that recently. You know how he could get toward the end." I stared at her. He wasn't confused. "Delia," he was clear. "We talked every week." She tilted her head in that patronizing way she'd perfected. "Honey, you weren't here. I'm sure you meant well." "But meant well," I repeated, blinking. "I have the emails, the scanned copies, the notarized documents." Someone behind me muttered, "She's bluffing." I turned. It was Ryan. I held up the folder again. "The county clerk has all of it on file." And with that, the auction was delayed. The crowd broke into whispers and clusters. A few guests started leaving, annoyed that the family drama had taken center stage, but the core group, the bloodline, lingered, hungry now. I slipped out from under the canopy and walked back toward the bunkhouse. I didn't want to be there when they started plotting, and I knew they would. I passed Grandpa's old pickup on the way, the red Chevy with the busted side mirror and the dent in the tailgate I caused when I was 13. He never fixed it. Said it gave the truck character. Said I gave it character. I ran my hand along the warm metal. "Still got that dent," came a voice behind me. I turned. It was Carl, Grandpa's oldest ranch hand, sun-dark skin, deep lines etched around his eyes, and a Stetson that looked older than me. I kept telling him I could pull it out, but he said, "Nope, that's Marissa's mark." I smiled. He really said that. More than once. Carl chuckled. "He was proud of you." I swallowed. "Did he ever tell the others about the management transfer?" Carl shook his head. "Charlie wasn't much for announcements." He said, "They'll find out when it matters." Guess he was right. I looked out at the fields, golden and sprawling. "They think I can't run it. They think they should have," Carl replied. "Big difference." I nodded slowly. "You staying on if you ask me to?" He said simply. That night, I lay awake in the bunkhouse. The old cot creaked when I shifted, and the fan made that ticking sound that reminded me of summers spent sneaking out to the barn with a flashlight and notebooks full of business plans. I used to dream of turning this place into something more, a working ranch with a bed and breakfast component. Maybe even a riding school. Grandpa let me draw it all out in his ledger. He didn't say much, but he always listened. In the quiet, I wondered how much of this was grief, and how much was old rage rising up. The next morning, Aunt Delia knocked on the bunkhouse door. She didn't wait for me to answer, just pushed it open and walked in like it still belonged to her. "Marissa," she said, folding her hands in front of her, "I think we need to have a conversation." I sat up, rubbing my eyes. About the future, of the ranch, of the family. I gestured toward the wooden chair by the window. "You can sit if you're planning to be honest." She gave me a tight smile and sat. "You embarrassed us yesterday." No, I said. You embarrassed yourselves. Her lips twitched. I don't want us to be enemies. I leaned forward. Then stop pretending you didn't know what I was doing all these years. You weren't here, she repeated. A note of desperation this time. We were dealing with doctor visits, breakdowns, weather damage. You were remote. I was keeping the place from defaulting. She ignored that. What I'm saying is, the ranch needs multiple voices. One signature shouldn't determine its future. Is that what you're telling the lawyers? She blinked. What I saw the folder in your car, the estate petition. You filed to contest his designation. Her cheeks flushed. You went through it was sticking out of your glove box. She stood, smoothing her blouse. You've made your position clear. Marissa, I'll speak to the others. We'll handle it as a family. I let her go. There was no point chasing someone who only saw you as an obstacle. Later that day, I found Grandpa's ledger again. I ran my fingers over the worn leather and opened to the page he'd signed last, the transfer agreement. There, in his shaky script, was the line I hadn't shown anyone yet. Let her build something new. The old ways die when they're hoarded. The rest of the family hadn't seen it. I wasn't sure I ever would show them. Instead, I made a call. Not to a lawyer, I already had one, but to a soil engineer. If the appraisal was correct, and it was, then the land had water rights worth fighting for, but it also had potential. The next week, I met with a local agricultural investor about a regenerative farming initiative. The same day, I spoke with the county board about zoning a small portion of the southern field for agritourism. They were more receptive than I expected. Turns out Grandpa had mentioned it once, and they remembered, back at the ranch. Cousin Ryan had started showing up more often, always with questions that sounded innocent but weren't. So, you gonna sell it? Could probably split the cash with all of us and still walk away rich. I didn't answer, because no matter how much I said, they weren't interested in the truth. They were interested in their peace. One evening, I walked the fence line alone. The sun was dipping below the hill, casting that perfect amber light over the grazing fields that no one wanted to maintain. I stood still and let the wind pass through me. This was my home. Not because of paperwork, not because of bloodlines or auctions, because I chose it. And it chose me back. And finally, I was done asking for permission. The paperwork came in a thick envelope with legal weight. I opened it slowly at the kitchen table in the main house, the place where Grandpa used to read the weather report aloud like scripture. The wood beneath my elbows still held the faint smell of varnish and tobacco. Inside notarized confirmation. The county had accepted my application to convert 30 acres of underused pasture land into a certified regenerative farming site. Along with that came eligibility for grants. Real ones with numbers that had more zeros than anyone in my family expected when they mocked my so-called spreadsheets and soil charts. I traced the seal on the last page with my thumb, breathing in that weird, cold sense of movement. The kind of feeling you get when you know something just shifted but no one else knows it yet. They still hadn't called? No one. Not Aunt Delia, not Ryan, not even the cousins who used to text me for help when their horses got sick or they couldn't remember which field needed burning. They were all waiting for me to fail loudly enough that it could be gossip. But I wasn't making noise. I was laying foundation. I started with the barn. The same structure where Grandpa had hung his hat for 40 years. It needed gutting. The siding was warped, and half the rafters were termite bitten. I hired local contractors, real ones, not family friends who gave vague quotes and disappeared. Carl stayed on to supervise, sitting in a folding chair most mornings with a clipboard and a thermos full of coffee. You ever wonder if they'll come around? I asked him one afternoon, watching the crew measure out the new loft. He didn't look up. They'll come around when there's something to take. That's how it always works. I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I knew he was right. Still, I couldn't shake this need, deep down, to prove them wrong, not with revenge, but with permanence, with legacy. So, I started rebuilding the brand. Lane Ranch wasn't going to be a hand-me-down relic of cattle auctions and failed sons. It was going to be something Grandpa would have smiled at, maybe without saying a word, but proud all the same. I created a new logo, a line-drawn image of the original ranch house with Grandpa's initials carved into the post. I paid a local artist, put it on signs, invoices, feed bags, and then I launched the website. It wasn't flashy, just honest. Photos of the land at golden hour, a page about Grandpa, not saccharine, just truthful, and a tab for the new initiative, The Land Returns. I called it that because that's what it felt like. It wasn't just mine. It wasn't just his. It was something in between, something rising again. The first week, I got an email, then another. By the end of the month, I had 2 interns from the state ag program asking if they could work the land as part of their thesis research. The same week, Aunt Delia showed up. She didn't knock. She walked right into the barn mid-renovation, wearing wedge heels that sunk into the dirt and a silk scarf too bright for ranch life. "Marissa," she called, waving a hand like she expected applause. I figured it was time we had a real conversation. I climbed down from the scaffold and wiped my hands on my jeans. She looked around. "You've done a lot. It's very modern. It's functional," I said. She smiled too widely. "That's what I meant." I waited. She didn't flinch. "I've been thinking. The family's been thinking. Maybe we could host a reunion here. Make it a tradition. You know, now that you've got the website and all." I stared at her. There it was. The shift. They wanted in. But not for me. For the image. For the story they could tell at cocktail parties. "Oh, you know, our family ranch. It's been in the family for generations. My niece is doing such a wonderful job keeping it going." I said nothing, just gestured to the door. "You can take a walk if you want, but don't touch anything. We're laying wiring." She blinked. It wasn't the response she wanted, but I wasn't the girl she remembered. That night, Ryan called. "Look, I think we got off on the wrong foot." He started. I let him talk. Let him fumble through small talk and strained jokes. Then came the real reason. "I've got a buddy, wants to rent out part of the northern ridge for dirt biking. Just weekends. He'll pay cash." I closed my eyes. "It's under conservation now. Ryan, there's an endangered butterfly population in that field." He snorted. "You serious? Dead serious?" "Jesus. Marissa, since when did you care about bugs more than your family?" Click. I didn't even feel guilty. Some doors, once slammed, should stay closed. Weeks passed. The grant money came through. I hired local high schoolers to help build the compost system, taught them how to rotate crops, took photos for the website. The land started changing. So did I. Then came the interview. A small local magazine, Ag Futures, wanted to profile the ranch's transformation. I said yes, nervously. They sent a journalist named May, a woman with silver hair, laugh lines, and a denim journal full of scribbled questions. We sat under the oak tree where the auction had once tried to sell my inheritance out from under me. "What made you stay?" she asked. I looked at the barn, the fields, the fencing I'd repaired. "He asked me to," I said. "Your grandfather." I nodded. "In his way." May smiled gently. "You're the only one left with dirt under her fingernails." That line made it into the article, front and center. When the issue hit print, someone slipped it into the mailbox at Aunt Delia's place. I never asked who, but I got an email from her 2 days later. Subject congratulations. No message. No warmth. Just that. Still, I kept the email. That weekend, I walked to the edge of the property, the overlook that dropped off into the valley where Grandpa used to ride at dusk. I sat there with a cup of coffee and watched the mist burn off the hills. And I thought maybe this is what belonging feels like. Not loud, not granted, but earned. The first frost came early that year. I remember waking up before the sun and seeing the fields coated in a thin shimmer, like someone had laid down a silver veil across the land. The ground was still soft underneath, but the chill in the air made it clear winter was coming fast, and the land was watching to see if I could keep up. I pulled on my thickest flannel, laced up my boots, and stepped out into the silence. Frost crunched beneath every step. The breath in my chest came out in pale ribbons. I didn't mind the cold. It made everything feel sharper, cleaner. It gave me something to push against. Carl had beaten me to the barn. I found him muttering at the new heating unit we'd just installed, trying to coax it to life with an instruction manual and a very specific kind of cursing I'd come to associate with old mechanics and older men. "Want help?" I asked, kneeling beside him. "Only if your hands ain't colder than mine," he grumbled. "This thing's got more wires than sense." We worked in silence for a while. Tools clinked. Breath clouds swirled. I glanced over at him once and caught him looking at me, not like a boss, not like a girl playing rancher, but with something close to respect. "You're doing it," he said softly. "What's that building it back up?" Even with them circling, I didn't answer right away, just nodded, because the truth was, they were still circling. I'd seen it in the emails. First, it was the congratulatory messages from distant cousins, ones who hadn't set foot on the ranch since high school, but suddenly wanted to know how I was managing things, in case I ever needed advice. Then came the invitations. A cousin's wedding, a family picnic in a nearby town, a holiday dinner where I could bring pictures of the new barn. Always casual, always with a line at the end that felt like a hook. It wasn't hard to see the pattern. They were laying the groundwork to rewrite the story. Suddenly, I wouldn't be the black sheep anymore. I'd be our girl Marissa, the plucky granddaughter who took over Grandpa's legacy like it was passed down in a velvet box instead of fought for in legal filings and silence. I didn't go to any of the events. I stayed on the ranch. The work didn't stop just because someone wanted a group photo for Facebook. Instead, I started prepping for the winter season. The regenerative rotation required we cover certain sections with nitrogen-fixing crops and protect the soil with mulch and frost blankets. It wasn't glamorous. It was labor. Real labor. My hands bled in places gloves couldn't help, but for once, I didn't feel invisible while working. Each choice I made was visible in the land. Each bruise was echoed in the healthier soil. Each sleepless night became a greener shoot in the spring beds. That was something my family could never steal from me. Then one day, in late November, I got a call from the county. The line crackled slightly, the voice on the other end warm and familiar. "Marissa, this is Cynthia from the Commissioner's office. We're putting together a presentation for the Regional Agriculture Board. Your project's been nominated for the Environmental Stewardship Award." I blinked. "Wait. What?" She laughed. "You heard me. The write-up in Ag Futures made the rounds, and a few members of the board were really impressed. They want to highlight your work during the winter session. Would you be willing to attend?" I almost dropped the phone. Yeah. Yes. Of course. "Great," she said. "Just send us a few slides and some photos of the land. Oh, and you can bring a guest if you'd like." After the call ended, I just sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the paddock gate swinging in the wind. It creaked the way it always had, unbothered by my small human victories. I didn't call anyone about it. Not even Carl. Instead, I grabbed my camera and went outside. I spent the next 2 days photographing the ranch like it was a person I loved. The lines of the fence, the curve of the pasture where the horses rolled. The rake marks in the dirt that showed the kids from town had been there last weekend for riding lessons. The small green shoots already fighting through frost in the test beds. I sent in the photos with a few slides explaining what we were doing: rotating crops, building topsoil, engaging local youth. No poetry, no flattery, just the facts. Then I went back to work. The award ceremony was held in early December. It was formal suits, name tags, and a buffet table full of overcooked chicken and overpoured wine. I wore my cleanest jeans, a white button-down, and a wool blazer I found in Grandpa's old closet. It smelled like cedar and sun. I'd had it tailored, just slightly, so it fit me. I didn't care if it wasn't what the others wore. It was mine. At the registration table, the woman checking names raised an eyebrow. "Lane Ranch," she asked. "That's me," I said, handing her my ID. "Oh, wow." She smiled, scanning the list. "You're the one everyone's been talking about. My brother forwarded your article, said he wanted to start composting after reading it." I laughed, a little stunned. "That's great." Inside, the ceremony was already buzzing. County reps, ag investors, students, scientists. I took a seat near the back, content to watch. But that didn't last long. When the awards started, the presenter called my name first. Marissa Lane, for outstanding innovation in sustainable land stewardship, proving that legacy isn't just what you inherit, but what you rebuild. Applause filled the room as I stood and walked to the stage. My throat tightened. Not because of fear, but because, for once, I wasn't being tolerated. I was being recognized. I didn't say much when I got the mic. Just a few words. "This land raised me. I'm just returning the favor." And then, the room clapped again. Somewhere in the crowd, I saw Aunt Delia. I didn't know she was coming. She sat near the front, lipstick too bright, arms folded tightly across her chest. I caught her eye for a moment. She didn't smile. Later, as I stepped out for air, I heard footsteps behind me. "You've made quite a name for yourself," she said softly. I turned. She was holding a half-empty wine glass, heels clicking softly on the pavement. "I didn't expect to see you," I said. "I had a friend on the board. She told me you were on the list. I was curious." I waited. She hesitated. "You're doing more than I thought possible. That's not an apology." "No," she said. "It's not." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of pine and cold earth. "Still," she added, "you look like him up there. That caught me off guard." "He would have been proud," she said, then turned and walked away, heels echoing into the dark. I didn't follow her. I stayed there, under the winter sky, letting the silence wrap around me like snow. Recognition didn't fix everything, but it was enough to remind me I never needed their permission, just the land's. And it had already said yes. The award plaque sat on the kitchen table for a week before I found a place for it. It wasn't that I wasn't proud, I was, but it felt strange. Placing something so shiny and official in a house built with calloused hands and quiet days. Grandpa never cared for awards. He once told me, "If you can hang it, it probably didn't fix a fence." Still, I eventually mounted it above the entryway in the main house, next to the faded photo of him on horseback with that crooked half smile. I figured they belonged together, proof of two different kinds of work. After the ceremony, the calls increased. Not just from family, though, yes. They came too. Now they wanted updates, wanted to swing by on their way to check out the progress. I let most of them go to voicemail. I wasn't interested in performing for anyone. The real calls, the ones I answered, came from people who wanted to work. Young folks. Tired folks. People who said things like, I just want to touch the ground again, or I've been reading about soil health, and I think I need to be part of this. It moved me in a way nothing else had. Because they weren't here for Grandpa's name. They were here for what I was trying to make of it. I created a volunteer rotation. Nothing big. 2 weekends a month. Room in the bunkhouse. Meals at the fire pit. Hands in the dirt. We started with just 3 people. Then 6. Then a full list with a wait list behind it. We laughed a lot those weekends. Shared stories over stew and cornbread. I watched city kids learn to trim hooves. Watched older men rediscover the rhythm of digging a ditch and standing back to admire the slope of it. The land responded too. The western pasture, once dry and patchy, had started to bloom again. Clover, rye, deep-rooted grass. The soil was darker, richer, easier to turn. We even had a small yield of winter kale and carrots. Stubborn things that pushed through the frost and refused to quit. I started to see the ranch less like a battleground and more like a body wounded. Yes, but healing. Not perfectly, but earnestly. Then, just as the frost began to lift and the first hints of spring teased the air, I got a letter. Not an email, not a call, a real letter, in a pale blue envelope with perfect cursive I didn't recognize. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper. It read, Dear Ms. Lane, I was a friend of your grandfather's. We served together long ago, before either of us had land or daughters. He spoke of you often. He asked me to write to you if he passed, not to offer sympathy, but to share something I think he never got around to saying. He believed in you. Not as a girl, not as a granddaughter, but as a steward. He said, She sees the land the way I do, but she knows things I never learned. You should know that whatever storms you face, he chose you. With full clarity. M. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it and placed it in the front cover of his ledger. The next day, I found myself back at the Overlook. I hadn't been there since the ceremony. The valley below looked greener than I remembered. Time has a way of softening things, even grudges. As I stood there, I heard footsteps on the gravel path behind me. I didn't turn. I knew who it was by the rhythm, slower, heavier than Carl's, more hesitant. I figured you'd be here, Aunt Delia said. I didn't reply. She stepped up beside me, arms folded against the wind. I've been thinking about the land, she said softly. How quiet it's gotten without him. He wasn't loud. I said, No. She agreed. But his presence filled a place. We stood in silence for a while, watching hawks circle in the sky. Finally, she asked, Why didn't you ever tell us what you were doing? I turned to look at her. Would you have listened? Her face tightened. Maybe not. But I might have tried. I shook my head. You never saw me as part of this? She sighed. We didn't know how to include you. That's not the same as trying. I know. Her voice cracked a little on that last word, and for the first time, she looked smaller, not weak, just tired, like a woman who'd spent too many years convincing herself she was the center of a story that didn't belong to her anymore. She reached into her coat pocket and handed me something wrapped in a cloth. I unwrapped it carefully. It was Grandpa's belt buckle, the silver one with the inscription Ride Forward. No matter what's behind, I found it in the drawer last week, she said. I thought it was lost. I thought he was lost. We locked eyes for a moment. Neither of us said thank you. Neither of us apologized, but something passed between us. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. It was enough. I took the buckle and placed it on the ledger in the kitchen, beside the letter and the plaque, not as trophies, but as proof. Proof that the past could be carried without being recreated. Proof that I had stood through winter and did not break. That night, we had a bonfire for the volunteers. We roasted potatoes and drank cider and passed around a guitar with only 5 strings. One of the younger girls, Cassie, asked if I ever missed the city. I smiled. Sometimes. But the silence here has its own music. Someone tossed another log on the fire. The sparks shot upward like wild prayers. And I felt it again, that grounded stillness, the one I used to only glimpse in Grandpa's shadow. Now, it was mine. Not because I inherited it, but because I stayed, because I listened, because I worked. The land had been my test, and I had passed without asking for their grade. By the time spring fully arrived, Lane Ranch didn't look like the place they remembered. It wasn't just the wildflowers edging the fences or the compost rows steaming in the morning light. It was subtler. The land stood taller, as if proud of its own recovery. It carried weight again, not the burden of inheritance, but the presence of purpose. Carl said it best one morning as we loaded seed trays into the greenhouse. "She's breathing again," he murmured, nodding toward the soil. The ranch had started to feel alive. The volunteers came in waves now, some for weekends, others for weeks. A woman named Trina brought her teenage son after reading about us in the paper. He needed something real, she told me, someplace that doesn't care how many followers he has. I watched that boy, pale and hesitant at first, learn to muck stalls, shovel mulch, plant beans in straight rows. He didn't talk much, but every morning he showed up before I did. His shoulders straightened by the day. By the end of the week, he asked if he could come back over summer break. I told him yes. We had more room than we knew what to do with. Word kept spreading. Lane Ranch was becoming more than a name again. It was becoming a rhythm, a cycle of labor and laughter, of digging and healing. And yet, despite the momentum, part of me kept looking over my shoulder, because the family hadn't disappeared. One afternoon in early April, I came in from the east paddock to find a strange car parked beside the main house. A polished black sedan, the kind you rent for meetings, not ranch visits. I wiped my hands and stepped onto the porch, boots heavy with mud. A man in a suit stood up from the rocking chair, folder in hand. "Miss Lane?" he asked. "Yes. I'm Brian Elwood. I represent a group of real estate developers out of Austin. Your property has been identified as a high-potential location for eco-resort investment. Would you be open to a conversation about sale or partnership?" I stared at him. He smiled, clearly used to skepticism. "It's not what you think. This isn't about condos. We're exploring luxury, low-impact models, solar-powered cabins, guided equine therapy, curated farm-to-table dining. With your existing infrastructure, it could be very..." "No." He blinked. "I haven't even shown you the I'm not selling, not partnering, not franchising, not commodifying." He laughed softly. "It's still just a ranch, Miss Lane." "No," I said. "It's not. It's a living record. It's sacred." Something shifted in his face. He closed the folder slowly, his tone changing. "I think you'll find the offer generous when you've had time to. I think you should leave." He did, but not before placing the folder on the railing and saying, "You'll be hearing from some of your family." I believe they were included in our feasibility discussion. I didn't need to open the folder to know which names were inside. Ryan, probably Aunt Delia, maybe even second cousins who'd barely stepped foot on the property in years. The next morning, I called my lawyer. She met me at the county office a week later, and we signed the final paperwork. Full title transfer, every acre in my name, including the water rights, mineral rights, and historical easements. I'd been managing it in practice for years. Now it was legal in the most absolute sense. I sent no announcements, made no calls. They'd find out eventually. Sure enough, 2 days later, the texts started. Ryan. So you're just cutting everyone out. Delia, I thought we agreed the land was family legacy, not personal empire. Unknown number. You know Grandpa wouldn't have wanted this. I stared at that last one for a long time, then replied, he did want this. He just didn't trust you to see it. They never texted again. By May, the wild lupines were blooming along the fence line, blue and violet and defiantly bright. I planted them years ago with Grandpa. He used to call them stubborn joy. Said they always came back, even when the rains didn't. The bunkhouse was full now. We converted the old storage shed into a study space for visiting students. A teacher from the university came out every Saturday to teach regenerative theory, while Carl and I handled the practical side. That weekend, as the volunteers gathered around the fire pit, I noticed a girl sitting apart from the others. Long dark braid, notebook in hand. She watched everything, every movement, every detail, but hadn't spoken all day. I walked over and sat beside her. First time here. She nodded. Yes, ma'am. Got a name, Sophie. You like the work so far? She looked down at her hands, dirty from weeding. I do. I didn't think I would. Why not? My mom said hard things weren't for me. I smiled. Hard things are for everyone. It just depends what kind of hard. She looked up, eyes shining. I think this place is helping me. It's helping all of us. I said. That night, under stars so wide they felt like a ceiling being lifted. I sat by the fire long after the others had gone to bed. The logs crackled low, and the silence was kind. The next morning, I woke up to rain. Soft at first, then steady. The good kind, not violent, just generous. I pulled on a coat and stepped out onto the porch. The fields shimmered, the water soaking deep. I walked out with my coffee, boots splashing through puddles, and stood by the fence. And I thought of him, of Grandpa, in his flannel shirt, hands like bark, boots like anchors. He wouldn't have said anything today, just would have nodded once, maybe tipped his hat, and I would have understood. I pulled the collar of my coat tighter and whispered to the wind I stayed. I didn't run. I didn't sell. The rain answered by falling harder. No ceremony, no approval, just grace. Later that day, I found the belt buckle still resting on the ledger. I picked it up, thumbed the edge, ride forward. It said. I clipped it onto my belt. Not for them, for me, for the land, for the girl who was once given a green tag at her own family's table and still stayed to fix the roof. Summer arrived with no announcement. It didn't need one. The land said everything. The fields went from green to gold. The air got thicker with heat and insects. And every sunset looked like it had been painted on the sky by someone with something to prove. I walked the perimeter fence every evening, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The walk kept me grounded. It reminded me of how much of this place I could touch, how far it stretched, how much I was responsible for. The fences were stronger now. I was, too, on one of those walks. I found something strange at the south gate. Tucked between the boards was an envelope. No postage, just my name on the front in rushed, almost shaky handwriting. I opened it there under the setting sun. Inside was a single page, written in ink that had slightly bled from humidity. I know I don't deserve to write this, but I need you to hear me. I was angry because I didn't know how to grieve. When Dad died, it felt like someone lit the map on fire and then asked us to keep walking. You didn't just walk. You built a new trail. I see it now. I see what you're doing. I don't expect forgiveness, but I do want you to know that I'm sorry. For the name tag. for the meeting behind your back. For not seeing you sooner. Delia. I read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and slid it into my back pocket. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I just felt quiet. It was the first time in months that something in me truly settled. The next few weeks passed quickly. The harvest from our trial beds was modest but strong. Beans, squash, even tomatoes all clean, vibrant, and full of potential. We boxed up samples and sent them to a local farmer's market downtown. We didn't even put our name on the label. Just from the valley in plain script. It sold out within hours. One day, Carl came into the barn grinning. "You're not going to believe who just pulled in," he said, pushing open the barn door. I followed him out, wiping my hands on my jeans. And there, standing by the fence near the old oak, was Ryan, wearing jeans too clean to be real and a truck with rental plates. He waved when he saw me. I didn't wave back. He walked toward me with something between a smirk and a wince. "Long time," he said. I said nothing. He glanced around the ranch. "You've really done something here." I crossed my arms. "What do you want?" He looked slightly wounded but recovered fast. "I'm not here to fight. I just wanted to see it for myself. Thought maybe I could help." "Help?" I asked. "Yeah. I've got some marketing experience now. Freelance. Startups. Mostly. Figured with all the interest you've been getting, you could use someone to manage your image." I raised an eyebrow. "I don't need an image. Ryan, I have land. That's enough." He gave a little shrug. "Okay. Just thought I'd offer. No hard feelings." I let the silence hang there until it got uncomfortable. "I read about the award," he said. "And the soil project? You're getting attention. Marissa. Real attention. People are gonna come knocking. They already have." He nodded. "Delia said you weren't taking offers." "I'm not. You could be rich." "I already am," I said simply, gesturing to the land. "You just don't recognize the currency." He didn't argue, just smiled and stuck his hands in his pockets. "Well, I'll get out of your hair. Just wanted to say, you prove me wrong." I let that sit for a moment. "You never had the right to judge me in the first place," I said. "But thank you." He walked back to his truck and drove away without another word. That night, I didn't tell anyone about his visit. I just sat out by the fire pit as the stars came out, one by one, and let the quiet remind me why I stayed. The next week, I got a call from the local school. "We heard about your mentorship program," the principal said. "We have a few students who don't really thrive in traditional classrooms. Would you consider letting them come out a few afternoons a week?" I said yes before she finished the sentence. 2 days later, they sent 3 boys and a girl, ages 13 to 16, angry, anxious, and unsure why dirt was supposed to matter. By the end of the first week, they were laughing while fixing the goat pen. By the end of the second, one of them asked me what compost tasted like. We made it a rule that if you asked a question, you had to help find the answer. So I made him stir the pile and smell it, and then we all laughed when he gagged. "You learn by doing," Grandpa always said. I was finally starting to understand what he meant. One evening in late July, after a long day of fencing and irrigation prep, I walked into the bunkhouse to check on supplies and found something unexpected. A note on the cot by the door, folded in half, no envelope. I opened it. "Ms. Lane, I'm staying because I finally feel like I belong somewhere. Thank you for letting the land speak louder than the people. Sophie." I sat on the cot for a long while, not reading it again, just holding it. Because when you fight for something long enough, you stop realizing when the war is over. You stop recognizing peace when it finally arrives. And there it was. A note from a girl who hadn't said 10 words in her first 3 weeks here. Now she was writing about belonging. I never needed a family reunion. I just needed this. The next morning, I added her note to a growing folder in the main house. Letters, photos, drawings, testimonials. Not for promotion, for memory, for proof, for the future, in case anyone ever tried to say I didn't do something real here. Carl caught me taping it into place and grunted. "You collecting praise now," he teased. I shook my head. Just the truth. He smiled. "Then make sure you leave space. You're not done yet." He was right. The land was still growing. So was I. And in the quiet of each morning, boots crunching on gravel, coffee steaming against the sunrise, I understood something I never had before. The ranch didn't need saving. It just needed someone to stay, someone to see it clearly, to listen when no one else would, and to answer the silence with work. That was my inheritance. And it was enough. The final stretch of summer always felt different. It was the same sun, the same heat, but somehow it pressed against your skin with a kind of farewell, like even the sky knew change was coming. That one last season of sweat and growth was giving way to stillness. I started waking earlier, before the rooster, before the wind picked up, before anyone else on the ranch stirred. I'd sit on the porch steps of the main house with my coffee, watching the mist curl above the fields, thin as breath. That's where I was the morning the package came. A plain cardboard box. No return address. Just my name and a little strip of handwriting on the label. "For your records." I opened it at the kitchen table. Inside were 6 old journals wrapped in a faded plaid blanket. Grandpa's. I stared for a long time before touching them. His handwriting was rough, stiff in places. Some entries were no more than weather reports. Others, though they were something else entirely. Notes about crop cycles, lists of names and livestock injuries, doodles of fencing layouts, and in the margins, scrawled thoughts that didn't seem meant for anyone. "Delia still don't understand this place. She wants it tidy. Ranch ain't tidy. Marissa saw the hawks today. Didn't just look, she saw them. That matters. If I go first, she'll have a war on her hands. Hope she knows she's already won." I read that line 3 times. Tears I didn't know I was holding pooling at the corner of my eyes. I had never seen those words before. He never said anything like that out loud. But he knew. He knew they'd fight me. He knew I'd carry it. And somehow, in the quiet of his own scribbled world, he had given me a final truth he believed I could hold it all: the land, the conflict, the legacy. That afternoon, I brought one of the journals out to the pasture, sat under the oak tree with my back against the trunk, and read until the sun moved over me. The shade shifted. The flies buzzed. The cattle chewed slowly in the distance, unconcerned with the weight of family drama or inheritance. I stayed out there for hours. When I finally stood, something in my chest felt looser. Not lighter, just more settled. That night, I called Delia. She answered after 3 rings. "Marissa, I got a package today." I said, "Grandpa's journals." A pause. "You did? You sent them, didn't you?" She exhaled. "I didn't think you'd want them. I wanted them more than the plaque, more than the land, even." She didn't answer right away. "He wrote about you," I added. "Not just about ranch things, about you, about what he saw in you." Delia's voice was brittle. "He didn't tell me those things. I don't think he knew how," I said, "but he wrote them down." Another pause. Then, "Thank you for telling me." I didn't forgive her in that moment. I didn't need to. But something about sharing that piece of him made the space between us less jagged, like we were no longer fighting about him, but with him in mind. I'll send you a copy. I said, I'd like that. We ended the call quietly. No promises, no plans, just breath. The next week, I printed off a few of the journal entries, the ones I thought mattered most, and tacked them onto the corkboard in the bunkhouse. The volunteers gathered around to read them after breakfast. Did he really call the goats dumb geniuses? One girl laughed. Every day. I grinned. Those journals became part of the land's new rhythm, not as sacred texts, but as markers, proof that we came from somewhere, that the roots were real. Even when the branches twisted, August brought the annual county harvest fair. The ranch had never participated. Grandpa thought it was mostly noise and corn dogs. But this year, one of the ag interns signed us up without telling me. I just wanted people to see, she said, what we've done, what you've built. I thought about saying no. I didn't want the attention, didn't want the press or the stares or the fake congratulations from people who once said I wouldn't last a week. But then I remembered something Grandpa once wrote: let them see. Don't need their praise, but don't hide what's good. So I said yes. We brought a simple display, a table with vegetables, before and after soil samples, a map of our rotation, and a banner that read, Lane Ranch returned to the earth, returned to us. I didn't expect the crowd. People wandered over, asking about compost ratios, crop timing, internships. Some just wanted to touch the soil jars. A few took pictures. One elderly woman teared up as she tasted our tomatoes. These taste like when I was a kid, she whispered, before everything got fast. By the end of the day, we were almost out of everything. Then, near sunset, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned and froze. It was my father. I hadn't seen him in 5 years. He looked older, thinner, more tired. A man softened by time, or guilt, or both. Marissa, he said. I didn't speak. I read about the award, the land. I had no idea. His voice cracked. No idea you were doing all this. I kept my hands in my pockets. He glanced at the table. It's beautiful. All of it. Your grandfather would have been proud. I didn't know what to say. My heart beat too loudly to hear my thoughts. I'm sorry I wasn't there, he added. When things were hard. They weren't just hard, I said. They were cruel. He nodded slowly. I know. We stood there for a long while, the silence stretching between us like a rope we'd both let go of years ago. I'm not here to ask for anything, he said. Just wanted to see you. See what you did. I looked him in the eye. I didn't do it to prove you wrong. He smiled faintly. I know. That's how I know it's real. And with that, he turned and walked away. I didn't call after him. I didn't cry. I just stood at the booth, watching the sky turn pink and orange, knowing that whatever needed to be said had finally been spoken. Back at the ranch that night, I walked the fence line in the dark. No flashlight, just moonlight and memory. I paused at the gate and pressed my hand to the post, the wood worn smooth where Grandpa used to rest his palm, and I whispered, to no one and everything. You were right. I did already win. I turned and walked back, boots soft on the dirt, not looking back, not needing to.